Hi again folks, Dr. Hale here with another video lecture. Today we're talking about fandom and identity. In this video lecture, we're going to talk about three things. First, we'll briefly discuss Click, Lee, and Holladay's 2013 article about Lady Gaga, social media, and fan-celebrity relations. After that, we'll turn to consider some of the main themes in Chapter 5 in Mark Duffett's monograph, Understanding Fandom. And finally, I'll discuss your next major assignment, the My Fandom and Identity vlog, which will be due September 20th at 11:59 p.m. So let's start with the 2013 article entitled Making Monsters, Lady Gaga, Fan Identification, and Social Media. It was co-authored by three individuals. Melissa A. Click, who is an assistant professor at Gaga University. She is the editor of the recently released and all-around excellent edited collection entitled Anti-Fandom, Dislike and Hate in the Digital Age. We're actually going to be reading a piece from that collection later in the semester. Hugin Lee is an independent researcher. And lastly, Holly Wilson Holladay, who is an assistant professor at Missouri State University. This article is very clear, concise, and well-organized. If you read it, you'll understand what it was that the authors did and what they were trying to accomplish immediately. If nothing else, file this away in your mind as a good example of clean and clear academic writing. The authors conduct one-on-one interviews with 45 fans of pop star Lady Gaga, who describe themselves as little monsters. The text introduces Lady Gaga and then moves into a lit review of three bodies of scholarship: fandom studies, theories about monsters and the monstrous, and finally social media and celebrity. I'll leave it to you to review that section of the text. Suffice it to say, this is good content that is worthy of your time, especially so if you're interested in studying any of those three topics. Okay, so what exactly is the point of the article? The authors argue that Lady Gaga and her fans have reappropriated and transformed the label monster as a marker of pride, self-worth, and uniqueness. Lady Gaga's creative output, from her music, fashion, acting, and so on, to her active use of social media where she shares her experiences as someone who felt outcast and who was even bullied, all of this has helped fans to connect with her and her message of self-love and pride. As Click, Lee, and Holladay explain on page 370 of their text, little monsters have reappropriated the term monster by re-articulating its outsider status to inner strength and originality. And, as the authors make clear, fans' relationship with Lady Gaga and popular media more generally can deeply shape one's sense of self, self-worth, and belonging. Okay, let's move on. Mark Duffett is a reader in media and cultural studies at the University of Chester in Chester, England. For American audiences unfamiliar with academic titles in the UK, this is akin to the US position of a full research-focused professor. Duffett writes and teaches about media fandom and popular music. The chapter that you read this week, entitled How People Become Fans, is from Duffett's excellent text, Understanding Fandom, an Introduction to the Study of Media Fan Culture, which is essentially the only fan studies textbook, or at least it is as far as I'm concerned. It's a really good book and worth your time, and to boot, it's not outlandishly expensive as most textbooks are wont to do. This chapter is quite lengthy, so I'm going to be glossing over a lot of it in the interest of time, but I can say this. Both of our good friends, sociologist Pierre Bourdieu and Frankfurt School theorist Theodore Adorno, both make an appearance in our work this week. Duffett covers a lot in this chapter. He considers and problematizes the idea of fandom as a kind of contagion, taking Adorno's work as a stepping stone in that direction. This notion, though it has some merit and the epidemiological metaphor of spreading via contact is both cool and remarkably relevant to our daily lives at the time of this recording, ultimately, Duffett points out that it bears a negative connotation. This is, as you hopefully remember, echoed in the earlier work of Jolie Jensen's article Fandom as Pathology. We didn't read it directly, but I did discuss it in a previous video lecture, and it's been referenced in most of the readings we've had thus far. Now, back to the whole contagion metaphor thing. If anything, I prefer imagining the spread of fans' affective attachments, more on that in a second, to popular media through the metaphor of murmuration. But what is murmuration, you might ask yourself, dear student? Feel free to imagine yourself thinking that or even asking that to yourself out loud. Go ahead, I'll pause. Okay, so you've almost certainly seen murmuration in action. It's when flocks of hundreds or even thousands of starlings fly about in swooping coordinated patterns. Now, why this metaphor? Well, it's because there isn't some sort of overarching top-down plan. The birds don't elect a bird czar that organizes and enforces everything. Instead, the birds keep tabs of, respond to, and follow or otherwise replicate the behaviors of the birds that are near to them. Like fandom, we're often influenced or affected by those around us. Now, Duffett also compares fandom to religion, drawing on the work of sociologist Emil Durkheim. We're going to leave that bit aside here, and then he also describes it as an emotional affect. So, to that end, I want to just briefly talk about what is called affect. And note the A. This is the verb, not the noun, spelled E-F-F-E-C-T, or as this theoretical orientation or perspective is sometimes called, affect theory. If you're interested, Google affect theory and read around. But keeping it short, affect theory focuses on the non-linguistic, non-rational, or not specifically conscious, if you want to call it that, forces that both rise from and shape culture, society, history, and politics, and that gives everyday life its rhythm and texture. This body of scholarship derives from the works of Sylvan Tompkins, Eve Sedgwick, and is currently being refined, expanded, and developed by folks like Sarah Ahmed, Elizabeth Pavanelli, and Lauren Berlanche, just to name a few working in this area. So affect isn't a synonym for emotions, but emotions do fit under its umbrella. It's about those kinds of charged experiences or relations that individuals and communities form with one another and with things. So in the context of fandom, fans often find themselves attracted to their favorite media text or celebrities or fan practices or fandoms, like a moth is drawn to a flame or magnets being pulled together or pushed apart. It's not exactly something easy to explain, but it is felt, and it's not entirely individual, it's also collective and social. So if we think back to Bourdieu's economical metaphor of culture that was first introduced to us in John Fisk's reading last week, and which is referenced here again in Duffett's work, fans don't often describe their attachment to their objects of desire and affection as if they were making a calculated strategic investment in some sort of cultural knowledge in order to increase their social status. It's not as if your vast knowledge of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is going to help you nail that interview at a major firm, though I suppose it could. It's often a lot more about feeling than it is about cultural capital. Rather than acting in some sort of purely rational and mechanical way, fans might catch a glimpse of a character or get exposed to media franchise online or be mentored by a more experienced fan, but then suddenly they're converted. They're making cosplay props, writing fanfic, and making Rule 34 themed content to their heart's content. This brings us to our final segue that's going to lead into our next major assignment, the My Fandom and Identity vlog. So this idea derives from the work of Daniel Cavicchi, who is an associate professor of American Studies and vice provost at the Rhode Island School of Design. In his 1998 study of Bruce Springsteen fans entitled Tramps Like Us, Cavicchi discusses what he calls becoming a fan stories. Look, it gets its own card. That's how you know it's important. These narratives focus on how individuals develop effective attachments to their object of desire and fandom. So I'm going to turn back to Duffett's work very briefly here that we read for this week to look at a quote that helps make these kinds of narratives a bit more clear. Duffett says that autobiographical first-person becoming a fan stories are usually the first things that fans talk about when they get to know others, whether in person or online. Such stories allow each individual to locate his or her fandom as a shift in personal history. They enable people to mutually position their identities by comparing and contrasting their particular histories. Becoming a fan is marked by changes in both an individual's subjective inner self and social role. And this brings us to that impending assignment. You can find these full instructions to the assignment under the Assignment Instructions tab on D2L. The idea is pretty simple, but it's important. I want you to record a brief 5 to 10 minute video where you describe your fandom or fandoms and how it was that you became a fan. Why? What motivated you? What is it about the things that you are a fan of that attracts you to those cultural forms? So this should be shot in a sort of informal vlog style format, but that doesn't mean you should ramble aimlessly until you run out of time. Instead, gather your thoughts ahead of time. Take notes, make good content. You'll record the video, upload it to YouTube, and then submit a link to said video via Dropbox on D2L. Okay, so that's it for this week. Feel free to enjoy this terrifying and beautiful visual that I created as an experiment in OBS. Take care. Bye.